You're listening to the All Things Data Podcast, the show that brings you insights and informed conversation around today's ever-advancing knowledge economy. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, All Things Data brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science, data-driven strategies, and enable digital transformation. Your hosts are Dan Yarmalak, Dr. Manjeet Reghe, and Thomas Marlowe.
Tom Marlowe and Dan Yarmalak here, and today we'll be chatting with Tim Panagos. I'm particularly excited about this discussion today because we're going to be able to get into some of the ethics around collecting and sharing real-world data, especially at scale, things that can really drive some of the transformations around AI and digital that a lot of companies are thinking about these days. As a little bit of background, Tim is the CTO and co-founder of Microshare.io. I'd definitely go check that out. Tim's an AI and data industry veteran going back to the 1980s, working with expert systems for banks and healthcare organizations. And he studied originally out in my neck of the woods at the University of New Hampshire for computer science, and then a master's in management of technology from MIT. So he's got the pedigree, and all of this is really cool. With a focus around bringing technology to solve real business problems, Tim's latest venture, Microshare, is democratizing IoT data management and analytics by packaging up solutions that make data-driven insights easy for businesses to purchase and consume, which I think is a real interesting thing for a lot of folks these days. Now, Tim, I hope I've given justice to briefly to what you're doing with Microshare, but you want to give us a little bit more background on what's going on with your company these days?
Sure, Tom. I hope I can do justice to that introduction. I'm blushing over here. Yeah, I'd be happy to. As you said, I started right out of school with a rabid thirst for AI, and at the time I had a overblown idea of what AI actually meant. And through my academic career, was sort of underwhelmed by what we really meant in practical terms by AI. And as I left school, was convinced that there must be somebody doing more. Being a science fiction fan, I had very high expectations. And I found one of the only games in town working with AI, which back in the early 90s, late 80s was expert systems, rules-based systems. And kind of got involved with that company, really kind of writing banking software. And I don't think anybody really ever thought they'd grow up to write banking software, right? It feels like one of those things you kind of fall into along the way.
A lot of kids talking about that during career day at school.
Yeah, I want to be a cowboy or write banking software, right?
Right up there next to firefighter and astronaut too.
Absolutely right. So it was a roundabout way to get to living the dream, but what I did get the opportunity to do was to really see how big organizations that fundamentally are only about data. When you think about a financial institution, there is no material product. Everything they have is information. It's the only product they actually have. Mm-hmm. So the sophistication around data management, data handling, data processing is, I think, probably greatest in the world. Cutting edge? Maybe not, but at scale and sophistication, certainly in the 90s, they were really the only game in town. And so I think it was accidentally a good place to grow up technically, looking at these really scaled business problems. And as I went through, a couple of decades of that evolution, we ended up doing more of the same kind of things, not only in banks and ended up in kind of healthcare insurance and those kind of tangential types of organizations. And we were deploying AI and data management and all these things in use cases that had really compelling value propositions, right? Because these are essentially only information processing organizations. And so they spent a lot of money, did a lot of, cutting edge things, and they got a lot of value out of them. But over time, what I began to see is, these technologies and these approaches aren't diffusing beyond these, robust enterprises that, clearly recognize unique value from them. In other words, there was no democratization of the technology and the approaches that people who didn't have, $50 million to spend on a project weren't getting AI, weren't getting, robust data management, but that I think, I'm not overselling it to you guys, you clearly see the value in being data driven. I think in almost any kind of company. So really what I wanted to do was to figure out how do we take these $50 million projects and all of the tools and techniques and technologies that we use in those and scale them so that they could be used by more people. And so that more people could get the value out of the data-driven paradigm. And of course, while we were on this journey, at some point we flipped from expert systems into machine learning as the kind of standard bearer for AI. And that became even more clear to me that having high quality, trustworthy, real information is absolutely critical to machine learning. And I think there's a lot to be democratized in that. So Microshare was really kind of founded to figure out how we drive that down market. And, if I can use the Jeffrey Moore diffusion of innovation language, to cross the chasm between these early adopters in the marketplace, and the mainstream of the market, which I think can really benefit from these tools.
Tim, some of those early adopters, and I assume you're talking about the bigger companies with the multiple comma budgets on them. I imagine for a lot of those, they grow to a certain size, and it's like the digital systems, the machine learning, these types of things make sense because they're at scale and they have to do something. And at a certain point, they can't just throw more people at the problems. When you're talking about crossing the chasm and reaching a greater market, do you find it difficult to for the end customer to understand that they need or would be greatly benefited by some of the digital machine learning, even expert systems backed processes?
Yeah, it's good. It's a great question, Tom, because classically we describe early adopters as, I think, having two primary features. One is that they have use cases that are unaddressed and very, very clear. So high ROI kind of use cases, and know where to turn for an easy solution. And then they also tend to have an innovative mindset, which means there's risk takers. They're not that interested in just following the status quo. They're ready to break glass. They're open to failure and experimentation. So it's a combination of that sort of risk-taking attitude towards things and that high-end use case. And you find people in the market who have one or the other and don't become early adopters, because without one or the other, you either lack the wherewithal, the funding, in other words, to get something done, or you lack the cojones to go out on your own and take a risk.
Sure.
So you have to have both. And, not to say that the other side of that chasm lacks both, but in general, what you'll find is that on a scale, they are lower in scale on both of those dimensions, right? Mm-hmm. They tend not to be risk takers as much. They tend not to have as kind of clear use cases. And there's often other solutions for the kind of problems that they see on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, I think it's kind of a forest for the trees problem in the mainstream, is that they're so well served by things that they have often a hard time seeing that there's a better way to do it because they've got a good enough way of doing things, right? So
Sure.
as you describe, do they need education? Yes, you always need education. But really what's interesting is they don't want to be educated about the details the way early adopters do. Early adopters tend to geek out on detail, right? They want to read specs. They want to be cutting edge. And the people in the mainstream, I think, are more, not that they're stupid by any means, but they've got day jobs and they've got tools that already kind of work. And everybody around them is also using those tools. So there's a real social difference between being an early adopter and being in the mainstream, where you're kind of sticking your neck out to do something different than everybody else is. And only over time and education, maybe do you begin to realize, maybe there is an advantage to doing something a little bit different. So that's where the education, I think, comes in. And if you can recall Jeffrey Moore's work, there's a bell curve, right? Mm-hmm. And the first part of that long tail bell curve is for early adopters. But, there's the peak of the bell curve and then there's the beginning of the bell curve that's crossed the chasm, where people have maybe more reason to stick their neck out than, people at the very top. But once you're on the downside of that bell curve, it's people who just kind of copy what their friends are doing and don't think too hard about it and just want to run it out. Right. So from my side, the need for the commercialization effort on that is education, as you pointed out, and it's kind of down risking things and taking a lot of the jargon out of the techniques and technologies, so that you're not talking about the nerdy stuff with these guys. You're really helping them envision how their business can be different. And I think a lot of tech buzz waves are crashing right now on that particular problem. The big data has a buzz wave that came and went. IoT has a buzz wave that came and went. But at the core of it, I think we're chipping away at this idea that data is a great way to run businesses of all kinds. Mm-hmm. And we just need to make it so that we drop the risk, educate people on their terms, and then get better at showing people that there is an ROI for them as well. And once we build momentum on the other side of that bell curve, and that Moorian bell curve of adoption, I think we'll see more uptake, and then eventually it's downhill. My God, I'd love to see that downhill side where people are just adopting because it's the thing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's like, you're not going to go to, say, a restaurant owner and say, hey, how about an AI solution for your business? Because they'll say, well, I don't want robots serving my customers. Yeah. But if you go to them and say, here's a package that's going to take your ordering data and suggest menu items and price updates for you, so you don't have to think about it.
Right. I think that's right. And, in some ways, I find that it takes the right kind of technologist and the right kind of culture of a company to bridge this gap too, because I think it's real easy for early adopters and the people who are used to serving them to geek out so much that they kind of begin to build contempt for the people who don't see the value immediately, and kind of forget just how hard it was to get to the point where they see the value. So, we just fundamentally never want to talk down or have a contemptuous attitude toward the people we're trying to serve, because those guys really know their business as well. They're smart people. They're at the forefront of what they're doing. And it's just that they are unaware yet of how the nerdy stuff we've been doing is applicable to them. And I think that's a key part of the gestalt here, is to say, look, we want to learn from you just as much as we want to teach you what we know. And it's the blend of those two things that democratize, right? It's not me inculcating you. It's not you inculcating me. It's us working together and finding the goodness in the middle. And I think that a lot of that's common language and things like that. But I think you hit it on, right? If you're talking to a restaurant guy, well, frankly, put aside the industry. At this moment, and maybe forever and ever, people are being asked to do more with less. What that means is different in different industries. But at the end of the day, automation and telemetry and AI as the sort of nerdy implementations of those things have a lot to say about doing more with less, doing better with fewer resources. At the end of the day, if you can find the right nouns to match with that verb, in a particular industry, then you've got soup. And then it's just really an implementation detail to close the gap.
You know, Tim, that's a really interesting point, because I think the implementation or the organization, the way the ecosystem is set up, people are taking pieces of the technology stack. And then, you know, we've had what we've thought of as third-party integrators in the past.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, in some senses, you know, you can consider Microshare or your thought process as data strategy as a service.
Yeah.
Consider it we'll get into the pivot with predictive cleaning and infection control and building automation, but it is kind of threading this complex thread through the needle of all the different touch points, but really emphasizing a use case. And you're right. I mean, I've never thought of first market movers as like wanting to get into the specs, but that makes sense. In the past, they want to talk about the platform. They want to talk about the analytics module. They want to talk about a particular sensor. But, you know, that's just kind of, that is not solving a problem. That's geeking out on details. And you're right. Somebody who's got a manufacturing facility just does not have the time for that. They have a lot of other burning issues.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, there's not enough of that kind of innovative mindset to go around, frankly. Not everybody, even if they know they need innovation, not everybody can find the right people to drive it, because it's a magic combination when you find those guys. And as a technologist, God, it's fun to work with those guys, right? But there's not.
Think about it, Tim, right? I mean, that's a great point as well. I mean, a manufacturer or a lawyer by background is conservative, and they follow a strict guideline because that means, you know, quality control or, you know,
that's right,
risk. So they get paid to be like that.
That's right, Dan. You know, following a formula so that you do things at highest quality is a time-honored strategy in certain areas. And, you know, there's plenty of places in the world where risk-taking is inappropriate, right? So you're right. And I think these are just reflections of personal attitude, personal experience, and industrial orientation, right? It's like, well, how has your industry been oriented? Like you said, you know, if you're a legal mind or an accountant or a, you know, manufacturer, it may not be your best interest to be taking a bunch of risk and not following processes and everything else. But I think all humans kind of get the sense that, yeah, I mean, we've had the idea that innovation is good beaten into us, certainly in the West, pretty thoroughly. Not everybody has the stomach for the actual sausage making, which is kind of the reality of that situation. But meeting people where they are is the bridge to that. And as you said, right, it's you know, in many ways we're all technologists get a little bit drunk dealing with those early adopters. We love talking about our stuff. And then we just we get lulled into believing the next tranche of people are going to be the same or maybe just incrementally different. And I think the reality is that the next tranche of people are very different. And you're turning them off by talking about radio frequencies and training sets. And is this a neural net or, you know, is it linear regression? They don't want to know that stuff. As soon as you start talking that way, they kind of tune out and you're, you know, they say, great meeting, and you never hear back from them, right? So I think it's recognizing that leap, and then, you know, it is incumbent upon us who have sort of grown up and forged some of these new technologies on the leading edge. We've got to meet them where they are because they don't have time to meet us. And so it's a lot of work, frankly, to tone that stuff down, democratize, learn to speak their language, and bridge. And historically, SIs have done that for the world. And they do it well, but they do it expensively, right? Because it's a bespoke process. And yeah, I'm going to get a bespoke outcome, but I'm going to pay for it. And so, you know, to productize stuff is that next wave of saying, all right, we're going to integrate, but not charge you dollar for dollar around the effort to do the integration. I'm going to integrate with an eye towards productization, drive the cost down, drive choices out, but hopefully do it thoughtfully and say, we're going to take the best of breed. We're going to leave you some latitude for those that really care to make some choices, but we're going to try to push to the side all these religious arguments that we have as technologists and say, look, let's just pick the best we can now, know that it's good enough, work where it's not good enough or where we think, the next horizon for improvement is. But, remove that from the fore and start talking about the ROI for these guys and really help them drive their business. And I think that's what Microshare has been doing. And I have to say that increasingly we're seeing good results from that. And being a bridge also between device manufacturers and AI providers, helping them cross the chasm to talk to our customers by being, the product bridge between those things. And there's still innovation going on, but it's more business innovation now than it is technical innovation. And man, that turns me on. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you think about a lot of companies that are scaling to the point where they need a solution like this, to the point where it's either, a lot more hiring or we need to get automation in place. They're growing so fast that they don't have the time to reach out and look at hardware and reach out and look at software options and do all these things. Like you're saying, they need something that can be delivered to them. And the reason why, I would imagine, the reason why when someone goes in and has the technical discussion with them, the guy whose business is growing to the point where he needs help is saying, I don't have time to figure this out.
Yeah. No, I think you nailed it, Tom. That's right. If you can afford it, that means you're busy. If you've got the time, that means you probably can't afford it, right? Your business isn't growing, it's not thriving, it's not challenging you. Then why would you look for a new tool? But ironically, that's when you have the time to look for a new tool. And so, you got a perfect storm, right? We're all humans and we got a limited bandwidth, and the demands of daily business is tough. I mean, I at risk of dating our podcast together here, we're in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis. And what is sure to generate that feeling in everybody's case is the massive amount of chaos that has been injected. It's not the only thing that has injected chaos or will inject chaos, but this one is global, right? It's universal. Nobody is not in chaos right now. And so everybody's got more than they can handle from a lot of different angles. And what's interesting about our time right now is one of the, I think, durable notions about people adopting new technologies, whether those are literally, bits and byte technologies, whether just new ways of thinking technologies, is, the past experience, right? What I've used and what I've been successful with sometimes gets in the way of people taking the time and thinking clearly about, well, what would I use now? Even though I've always been successful doing it this way, is there a better way to do that now? There's nothing like a global pandemic to throw all experience out the table, and everybody's now on an even playing field saying, I've never seen anything like this before. So I'm less inclined to think just doing what I've always been doing is going to get me through. And so we live in an opportunity period as well that sort of opens people up because there is no experience to draw upon. So I think that's a perfect environment for data-driven because who else am I going to believe? There are no experts in something that's completely unprecedented. And therefore, I think it's a great time for our collective message of, data can help us here. It's not the only answer. And I also think my background in AI for the newer folks to AI who just think AI is ML, ML thrives in an environment where there's a lot of data and you got enough to train on, you got enough to test with, and then a flow of steady data to actually apply your algorithms to. And that's not a world that looks like unprecedented activity, right? Something that just started happening does not have a body of information built up about it.
No kidding.
Right? And this is the world more of expert systems where you're counting on human intelligence to automate. And so I also see this as a perfect blend of those AI disciplines of expert system, rule-based, human asserted expertise baked into a system to bootstrap the data management, insight generation, automation to feed then over time a more robust data stream for machine learning to begin to pick up and improve.
Could not have put it better. This is This is exactly the message that I think a lot of folks need to hear and be thinking about, because you're absolutely right. A lot of times we need AI, and the immediate first step is, okay, machine learning.
Data, yeah.
Dump some data into the machine learning and it'll give us amazing results.
Yeah.
Well, that's how a lot of AI implementations fail spectacularly.
Yeah. I think probably everybody listening to this has had a garbage in, garbage out experience, right?
Yeah. And expert systems, I think, while it doesn't sound as sexy as machine learning does these days,
yep,
they provide tremendous amounts of benefit if you're moving to there from essentially manual, right?
Agreed.
Tremendous. And it gives you really nice data at the end of it.
That's right. And what's great, I think, today, Tom, versus, when we were doing expert systems in the 90s, is we now know that the target is to enrich ML. Mm-hmm. So everything we do at Microshare, for instance, is, we're doing a lot of expert system stuff for people because, hey, guess what? The experts in COVID, for instance, are scientific papers that are being revised and published every minute we're talking, right? So it is cutting edge, it needs to be flexible, it needs to change, but we know that our target is to produce good quality data that we can then begin to filter through ML over time to improve beyond what the experts are saying, to really use data to validate, data to improve. Mm-hmm. And I see that as a virtuous cycle of automation that we can tap into today. And I think it's just coincidental that I've had exposure to both sides of that we can bring it to bear. But I think most people, like I said, I think more people will become aware of that because, I find it heartbreaking how many ML researchers have to make up the data before they can run their algorithms because the data just doesn't exist on a high enough quality. And how many people are data scientists, but actually they turn out to be data engineers because they spend 98% of their time worried about the data quality and where it came from. And, I'm trying to remove all of that with Microshare. And a lot of that's a lot of heavy lifting that most of the business doesn't recognize. So some days it's hard to say, we're going to continue to invest in this track. But I know at the end of the day, real value will be unlocked by being able to provide high quality, high volume data to machine learning. And, it's just priming the pump. So we spend a lot of time worried about that. Is their data high quality? Is this data we can trust? And then, I don't know if this is a segue point for you guys, but something I'm really passionate about is also making sure that the data we collect is done so in an ethically responsible way. And doing that right from the get-go, because if it's not baked in, then it's an afterthought. And I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah,
okay.
That's
one question you have, Tim, is let's, for the listeners, make sure that Microshare is, this enterprise scale IoT solution for real-time infection control, predictive cleaning, occupancy and asset tracking, smart buildings without sacrificing privacy. So just a little bit back, we can, just from the name Microshare, this wasn't intended to be safety and sanitation as it relates to the pandemic. You pivoted there, but tell us what else you're doing, but also for anybody that's an entrepreneur seeing these technological advances and want to apply it somewhere, and then how COVID made you think, Tim, I think would be very interesting for people. Many people are hesitating with solutions, and what was your decision tree to kind of go hard into that space?
Yeah, man, we're 8 years old, so we're fairly mature as a startup, but man, the wounds feel still pretty raw. It's I think as anybody who really knows what tech entrepreneurship looks like, there's very few unicorns and there's a lot of real tough grinds. And ours has been a tough grind. I think that, and I think every entrepreneur thinks when they start that they've got it nailed. They've got a real true thesis and some proving in the marketplace. And I think as we have found, there's a lot of tuning necessary to really meet both the market in where they live and the time in which we live, right? It's where and when. And so we began really around, the reason it's called Microshare was really around this novel data management technology that we'll talk a little bit more later about. And I hate to say it, but I didn't think so at the time, but it really was the cardinal sin of a good tech looking for a problem. It didn't feel that way at the time. Maybe it's more accurate to say we didn't have the right problem that we were trying to solve when we first went to it. And, the decision tree, it's always cleaner when you look back and try to describe it. It was messy, and it's, probably messy still, but getting clearer. I think the key forks for me were, if you're an enterprise solution and you've got a novel data management choice, if you go to somebody and say, hey, you should convert your banking software to use this novel data management thing, they're going to look at you like you got 5 heads. Hey, I've had this in a mainframe. I've had it in an Oracle database. I've had it in an XYZ for, 5 decades. Why the heck would I ever take a risk on a new technology to manage it?
Right.
Hard sell, real hard sell. What we came across was IoT. Because what's interesting about IoT is even though, there was this boom bust cycle in the buzz of it, there is value there, and it is data that's a little bit different and doesn't already have a legacy home in an enterprise. You go to a CIO at a Fortune 100 company, they're not like, yeah, here's our IoT data strategy. It was baked 5 years ago. It's, robust. It's got, all the I's dotted, all the T's crossed. That doesn't happen. Everybody's like, well, this is brand new. We don't really know. I'm not going to put it into my Oracle database with my CRM data. So, it opens the opportunity for something novel.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. So where was not the secret sauce, but where did your passion lie as an integrator or an integrated IoT enterprise scale solution? Where were you? Was it the tech was the privacy rules governance engine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my last stop in my career train was with Accenture. Those are probably familiar, global, massive systems integrator, and had a great period with them where I got to look around globally, which was, a really fantastic vantage point for me. Got to look around globally at what people were doing with, the combination of AI, cloud, data, and helped a lot of people, but also got to see a lot of problems that just went unsolved, right? So there were things that people were dealing with that were kind of like, we don't really know what to do about this, so let's kind of sweep it under. And one of those key things, and I will say it's an item that I personally resonated with me, so I latched onto it, really was that deal about how do you run a data-driven business without taking advantage of the people that generate the data. And this is a paradigm that people are familiar with via online behaviors and trading in online data, with controversies around Facebook and Cambridge Analytics, and the impetus behind legislation in the EU around GDPR, and more lately California and New York. Individuals are starting to get the oogie sense that there are organizations that might be mistreating their information and are mystified by that, and probably quite rightly alarmed by that. And, you could see this coming for decades. And it was one of those kind of problems that felt to me like it needed to go back to first principles to solve. And it wasn't something you could just skim over the top with a Band-Aid, because it was, one of these fundamental notions about how business ought to be done, about how we as humans act, and, what does it really mean for a business or an organization more generically to be data-driven? Well, fundamentally, if it's not based on an ethical approach, then I can't feel good about it, and probably nobody else can feel good about it. So that was one of those problems that just leaped out and said, yeah, we got to do all these other things. We got to collect good data. It's got to be clean. It's got to be dependable. It's got to be shareable. It's got to be blah, 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 blah. But this elephant in the room about it's also got to be ethically collected, sourced, and managed. How are you going to do that? I didn't see anybody stepping forward and saying, yeah, we got that problem nailed. So even in the bespoke world where money's no object, I'll spend $100 million to solve it, I didn't see anybody coming up with anything clever. So I hate to think of myself, admit that I think of myself as clever, but I thought I had a unique angle on taking some of the things we had done, going back to first principles, throw away a lot of the assumptions that people had made about data management, and kind of go back to basics as we built the core of what Microshare became. And yeah, we do business on a lot of the surface stuff, right? We're delivering value for facilities managers who are running everything from office buildings to hospitals to mines and factories and educational institutions. We're serving a lot of people with just ground floor basic problems that they need to solve at scale. But underneath, we have this this company mission and this fundamental patent pending technology around how do you manage that privacy problem in a way that I think nobody else has contemplated. And I'm pretty passionate about that personally.
And it's an area that, yes, data privacy gets a ton of attention, especially in the last several years.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's all this, I don't want to say virtual data, but online world type data. What am I putting in social media? My information that I'm putting into accounts on websites and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
In this whole, IoT, let's call it real world data, physical measurement, physical sensor data. It's like it's not even part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's a back seat, and it's brought up occasionally, but it is a small portion of the conversation relative to online behavior. I think that's a sign of our times about we transact digitally, we express our concerns digitally, and almost by its very nature, you need to be involved digitally to worry about something vocally. Therefore, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But what I see as somebody educated in IoT is, and fundamentally at heart, I'm a libertarian. So I'm worried about the liberties of individuals philosophically. The threat of real world surveillance, I think, trumps our digital footprints and surveillance. Now, a lot of data scientists who are listening to this are going to say, yeah, but we're able to use digital behavior to predict real world behavior pretty well. And yeah, you're right. So there is that too, right? So I'm not suggesting at all that digital data is something we ought not to worry about, but this idea of real world telematics is something that people really need to wake up to, because at the end of the day, you have the choice to turn off your phone and turn off your computer, and you think you might now be undetected by, say, a rogue corporate or a rogue a government or some other entity that might want to track and control, but you're not. There's surveillance all around us, and that data, I think, is much harder, much less personal. It's harder to perceive because it's that blinking camera you probably didn't notice is trained on you. Right. It's not the phone you're holding in your very hand, right? So it's a little more abstract, but I think it is a greater threat. But simultaneously, I think it's also a greater opportunity. And this is part of the balance that I see. I'm very pro-business. I'm pro-organization. I'm pro-humanity, but I'm also very strong pro-individual right. But I think you can balance those things. And I think real-world data is the battleground, actually. And the war is already underway. And in many ways, your social media outgassing is just today's example of your CRM and banking information. In my analogy earlier, Google is not looking for a new way to manage their data. Facebook is not looking for a new way to manage their data, though they probably should be. They've got this problem for sure. But again, this real world, I think, is underestimated and is still new. There's no paradigm that says we already know how to handle that, and you're disrupting that paradigm. So it's a great opportunity for us to come in and say, look, let us start with this data in the right way. And if I might just highlight what I think is special about that, one, to support businesses in being digitally driven and being data driven, be that online or real world behaviors they're measuring, I think is a societal good. I think it's good for business. I think it's good for governments. I think it's good for individuals because it's all about doing more with less. And we are very much in a world where we need to do better with the resources we've got, because new resources are hard to come by. And, guess what? People's comfort, people's standards of living, people's safety, these are real concerns. And how do you continue to advance the world from a perspective of human well-being, while at the same time respecting the constraints we have, very real constraints on resource use, so that we're not burning our environment and wasting our resources. At the same time, we're trying to lift people out of poverty and keep people safe. And in a lot of ways, that's a frustrating equation, but I'll tell you the path through needs good quality data to make those decisions. I don't know what the decision is. I don't know what the data will tell us, but I do know that's the path through. It's not through, human intuition and arguments online, and all that stuff is just too easy to politicize. Real data, I think, is the only path to striking the balance that we must make if we're going to balance these, societal values. So I think that's clear in my mind. So how do you do that? Well, number one then is you have to recognize the job is not to deprive organizations of data, because if you do that, they're going to keep doing it the way they've always been doing it, and I don't see that as a good
innovation, and you're going to slow progress. And
right, Tom.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah, you don't want to do that, and the human heuristics are limited, right? So we want to supplement with good quality data. At the same time, we don't want organizations to think it's okay to steal the data. We don't want them to think it's okay to hide it, to do things behind the scenes. And in many cases, I think, a lot of people's fears are overblown, but they are derived from, I think, a meaningful fear about things being done out of sight. That transparency at the end of the day is what's really called for in many cases. And yeah, there's going to be some bad actors, but the majority of business want to do the right thing. I really don't think that the meme about, corporations being default evil or governments being default evil is right. I think by default, they want to do the right thing, but, it's possible to do evil along the way. I think transparency really helps that. So what I want to be able to do is open up the ability for organizations to be data-driven, but at the same time give unprecedented visibility and control about the data that's being collected by individuals, so that they can see it and they can make decisions at a granular level. Use it for this, use it by that, this but not that, in this case but not that case, and ultimately maybe even participate in the value creation to the extent that that is something that is possible. Because as we go on and we increase more data-driven value, AI, automation, I think we do also need to keep in mind that we can't be impoverishing people. And at the end of the day, participation in that value creation system, I think, is something we need to, as a society, figure out. I haven't nailed that. I don't know what the politics of that are or what the right way to do it is, but I do know, again, data is at the core of it. And so we need to begin to unlock it, experiment with it, and find novel ways to address it. And I think, Microshare is we've chosen one, and we're trying to commercialize it and see where it leads. And it opens up this opportunity to share data, where I think otherwise that activity would be underground.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I like the point that you make around transparency, because that's become again, an issue in the digital world, right? You go to a website these days, and on just about every website now, there's a little pop-up, comes from the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen or the side of the screen, or it says, hey, we use cookies. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
It's in a lot of ways that transparency might be easier in the digital world, because you can just throw a pop-up in front of someone and they can say, okay, I don't know what a cookie is, but fine, I want to read my article. In the physical world, it's the user interface is a lot broader.
Yeah.
So if you've got a camera, that's off 100 yards away, and a motion sensor, and what have you, other sensing devices, what's the path to transparency around those types of things?
Yeah, Tom, a fantastic question, right? So the physical world and the digital world, right? I think there's no mistake why there's been so much innovation in software, because it's easy, relatively speaking, to start a software company. I can do it with a laptop. And that's
Sure.
literally what I did, right? There was no asset in Microshare aside from a couple of laptops when we started this. And you can go a long way with no more than that. So it's an easy area. The barrier is low to innovation there. But, technologists in this space talk about IT and OT, right? Information technology, operational technology. Mm-hmm. And in general, we talk about operational technology as being, mostly non-digital. We're talking about in the building space, it's HVAC systems, but, it might be the nuclear power plants, reactor is OT.
Sure.
And there's a whole groups of people who worry nothing about those cool technologies. And really what we're talking about is bringing those two things together. And I think IoT is the hint that these things actually aren't divorced in reality. They are one and the same, that every piece of operational technology increasingly leaves a digital exhaust. And IT has all of these cool tools. Yeah, we might have sharpened the tools on online behaviors, but these tools are at least as applicable to this digital exhaust from OT world. And it's kind of merging those two ideas together and then improving on that new branch that they create together. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, if you take the buzz out of IoT, Internet of Things, what does it mean? I actually think it is that intersection of information technology and operational technology. How do you take the best of those things, merge them, and get, some of the parts, greater? And I think that that is at the heart of it, what we're up to in practical terms. And to Dan's earlier question, I didn't really envision that's what we would be up to when we first started the company. I didn't really imagine that we'd be as worried about bits as we are as bytes. And I would say that at the moment, my company has to be as equally worried about both, because a lot of the logistic problems that come along with dealing with the bits of operational technology present challenges that didn't exist in the pure IT world. And I think as we go along, more IT will bleed into the physical world, and the physical world will become more blurred with the digital world. And in fact, we talk a lot about digital twinning is kind of the buzzword, but it's the idea that you can model the digital, you can model the physical in the digital, and use the tools that we know and love in IT to make decisions, gain insights, and control and measure what's going on in the physical world. And that, I think, is maybe just a higher order thing over top of IoT. You need the IoT aspect to generate the digital exhaust. Then you bring the AI, data management, visualization, insight into action tools that we've been doing in the big data space. You mix them together, and you got that next order, which I think is something like digital twin. I don't know what the right word will be, but something like that, that allows us to manage closer to the flexibility that we're used to in digital with the physical in scope. Man, I think that's where the next, the rest of the century will be innovating in that direction. And I think there's a lot of societal good to come out of that.
Oh, that alone, I've got a background in the semiconductor industry, and I think about lifetime testing, stress testing, that type of stuff, and having a digital twin or a digital model like that that's grounded in real world, real time collected data. Very valuable.
Yeah, and so there's hope for us, brother. So there's a lot of semiconductor guys out there. I think we've lived in many ways. If you've been in silicon in any way, there's been either boom or bust, but the bust is for more people than not. And I think we're going to see the end of that, because there's been a lot of innovation in devices, and I am in a perfect position to take advantage of that. So thank you, hardware guys, for suffering through the last 10 years of still innovating, even though frankly, the world hasn't been paying that much attention to you if you weren't in the iPhone. But we have this bedrock of innovation that has really not made the market impact yet, that is based on investors who have been investing on the promise, and really good engineers applying these very durable, very robust engineering practices. Frankly, puts software guys to shame, the amount of testing and verification that the OT guys go through, right?
Well, it's a lot more difficult to push out a fix.
Yeah, and so you got to get it right to start with, and there's a much bigger downside if you got your nuclear power plant chip wrong. If your app gets to the app store with a bug, right? So
right.
There's all of that, and the great thing is now that we've got those innovations and kind of pent up innovation, I think is really what it is, in the physical space and the digital coming together with it. I don't know, maybe I'm just optimist. I think you got to be an entrepreneur, but man, I see it as a perfect storm, man. We've got cloud allowing us to scale digital. We've got a pent up innovations in the physical world that haven't seen the market. And really it's up to just somebody to bring them together, scale them up so people can depend on them, de-risk them, and then learn how to talk about them. So this next wave of business people can just adopt. And then for God's sake, I hope we learn the lessons of the past and do it ethically, right?
And also do it in a solution-based format, right? Where the buyer doesn't take all the risk on. It's a tremendous amount of risk and investment and time culturally. And quite honestly, like you said, these engineers have been working on these tremendous technologies, but they haven't been able to be consumed because they charge too much, or they don't tell the right story, or they don't share the risk. And I find anybody that's willing to share the risk in the IoT space, kind of like Microshare, seems to be on the winning side of the equation right now.
I hope that's true. Obviously, selfishly, Dan, but I agree with you. Our assessment of the market fits that in spades. In that, if you democratize the technology, you take solution space and reduce it. You're also de-risking the deployment. So if you have smaller variables, you can begin to use some of that OT knowledge to shrink the risks, but you also have to do the same on the business side. So I would say from Microshare's side, I'm the CTO, but I'll give my partners a lot of credit. I think we've innovated at least as much on the business model side to say, how do we do this as a service in a way that makes us take a lot of the risk out of the hands of the business so that it doesn't work out, that it doesn't cost them anything. It becomes an operational expense. We hide a lot of the business nitty-gritty and all of the technical sausage making in a way that does allow it to be solution oriented. And so you also get to try it for you kind of fully. Actually, you never really need to make a big commitment. You can if you want to, right? And in some ways I see maybe our role as maybe Microshare isn't the always IoT solution for some of our customers, but I think we're a great starter, that we are giving people an easy way, low risk from a business and technology perspective to try it out. I see my job as showing them the value of the data and opening their eyes to this idea that data-driven is real, has ROI, it is a solution-oriented, Dan, and at the same time can be done ethically, Tom. And once those eyes are open, once that educational, I think you can get business people hooked on it. And then, if there's other solutions to come that share more risk with the business, maybe. But where we are in the market right now, I think is right. Dan, we got to help close that gap on all fronts. And I've said this for a while. If we believe, in the IT space, if we believe that we really do have a great way to unlock it, why aren't we eating our own dog food? Why are we asking somebody else to make the bet? I told my partners, if we really think this is true, we should open our own bank. Put our money where the mouth is. And, it's hard to open a bank. So at the end of the day, we opened Microshare instead, but I think it's the same kind of notion. Let's us make the bets because we are in the best position to be confident about the outcomes.
That's right. I mean, and I think the persona of the organizations that mature enough, digitally mature enough, they've kind of stubbed their toe and they realize that data is important, and then the systemic issues are too large that they can't throw bodies at it. And you got to think differently with automation. I mean, I think the market is kind of turning towards these things, but you got to, it's also very hard because you got to find the right person or company to adopt, right? I mean, it's this great matchmaking. It's almost, you can think of it like marriage or something that they're willing to try that and go for it. So I applaud you, Tim. I mean, if you think about Microshare in terms of predictive cleaning and infection control, if this was adopted just in mass, then we would have contact tracing, so to say, So perhaps we can learn from the moment and go that this way of thinking and data can be very helpful for the public good and public health as well,
Agree. And I think, I've done a bad job of commercializing ourselves and using this opportunity to send a commercial, but we are working with some real innovators in the return to work space, and working with them has been very rewarding. And obviously we have a very compelling event to take advantage of. So there's a wind at our backs, but we're using the stuff that we created newly in terms of contact tracing, and using stuff that we've been working on for now years. What we really find is that it's the combination of multiple sensor types brought together that really makes a difference, right? We're finding out that people care about cleaning maybe more than the virus does, but being visible with your cleaning efforts in a space helps put people at ease, and that's important. Mm-hmm. But as we get back to work, we're finding that contact is important to track, but also things like air turnover, air quality, probably have a disproportionate impact based on what we're seeing in new science on whether we're actually transmitting virus. But at the end of the day, no one dimension is the key to improving this. And I think that's the theme of data-driven altogether. It's the more types of data, the more types of high quality data that you can put together at once, the better view you have of the real world and the better decisions you can make. And, I feel pretty good about where we are, both as a business and as just a contributor to society, that, we've got some innovators who are just a pleasure to work with, who are driving this return to work, doing it in an ethical way, and helping us be part of that innovation cycle, figuring out what to really do here. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think the world knows that pandemics are possible, and we're going to enter a world where people want to know that their employers have thought about it. Even if we get a magical vaccine for COVID, everybody knows it's possible now. And so why would you go back to just doing things the way you used to? I think businesses will want to change. I think the best employees will want to work for people who care about their long-term health. And they're watching how people are behaving right now. And yeah, none of us have exactly the answers, but that spirit of data-driven experimentation that is in the marketplace, because there's really no other choice, I think this is going to lead to more opportunities for everybody in the data marketplace. That is probably our audience for this podcast.
Kim, one of my last question is, how do you envision the future of work in the near term under this COVID context?
Yeah, good question. Good question. It's wide open. So I'm opining in this case, but we spend a lot of time with industry pundits and customers and talking about this. And we were talking about it before the quarantine hit. And I think what we're going to see is that the trends that had existed before are going to accelerate. And what were the trends? Well, you saw things like WeWork growing in popularity. You saw people increasingly using digital to disintermediate the physical. So it was slow, surprisingly slow, but work from home or work remote and distributed workforces, I think, has been a trend that's been in place since the dot-com boom. And I think this is really accelerating with the quarantine, where people are now realizing that, hey, I can get work done with people remote, but there's some lessons to learn, right? There's some tools that are necessary. And guess what? Employers, I think, also realize my responsibility to my employees can't end at the door to the corporate campus. If work is extending into the home, then so does my accountability to my employees. And I've got to figure out how to do that. How do I ensure people are healthy and safety and productive when they're at home and distributed? So I think what we're going to see is the world begins to divest of large office, large campus, large centralized places where humans congregate, go more to distributed, where, regional offices become more popular, flexible space that you saw with WeWork continues to accelerate. If I want people to get together once a month to have a whiteboarding session, it's really hard still to do engineering without a whiteboard around, I find.
I
but
agree with
I don't
that.
need an office for just to hold the whiteboard if I can just rent one when I need one. And I think IT will fill some of that gap too, to make it better and better to use the tools we're using now for this podcast to do normal business. And that's going to continue, right? And I think that also emphasizes people understanding work better, clustering people together. If we work together, then we ought to be housed together, and that reduces the risk of infection, yes, but it also probably improves our happiness and productivity, that we get to be with the people that we collaborate with. So I think all of this is going to continue to drive change. 2020 is going to be panic, calming the panic, starting to get back to work. I think 2021, we're going to see, let's start redesigning what we think about work and how the OT environment adapts. And I think, but 2022, I think we're going to see data-driven workplaces is going to be the norm, and people are just going to want to continue to get better at it. Investment will continue, and there'll be a lot of work for people who listen to the podcast, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And to your point about co-working spaces like WeWork, I know there's a lot of opinions out there that this pandemic has kind of been the nail in the coffin for WeWork particularly, but take their business practices kind of out of the picture for a minute. I think co-working spaces like that in general will come back and thrive after after 2020 into 2021.
Yeah.
Because a lot of companies, basically we've tested the theory that remoteness can work. Yeah. And for a lot of companies, the answer is, yeah, it works. And it actually works pretty well. But there's a lot of people that are realizing that working at home from the kitchen table or from the bedroom and with the distractions of the house isn't always ideal.
That's right. Yeah.
But they don't necessarily want to live, in the same place that the corporate headquarters is.
That's right.
And so you take that remote checkbox, and then you go with where do I as a human want to live and spend time with my friends or family or what I like doing. And I think you'll see, okay, I live out in, like for me, I live out in Maine. The company that I'm with is out of Minneapolis, and at a certain point, you need an office space to either be quiet, like you said, get access to a whiteboard. If anybody has got a really good connected whiteboard solution where I can whiteboard with somebody who's not in the same room with me, I want to talk about that because I've been looking for it for a while.
CC me if you find it, Tom.
Yeah, right. Okay, I will. That goes out to our listeners. Please let us know. But I think that works really well because most of those people don't want to sign a 3-year commercial lease and deal with utilities for an office space. And that's what the co-working provides, that place to get away and get your work done, maybe be more productive.
I think one thing is entirely uncontroversial right now, Tom. No company is signing 7-year leases for 50,000 square feet of office space right now. That's
right.
not happening. So what's the business model to replace it? Because, the reality is we're also monkeys. And so we can't escape our preference for physical interaction, and digital does a much better job than it used to, but it still, I think, falls short in a lot of people's minds. And so what we have to figure out is what the right blend is, and then improve in that channel where it's a combo, right, of face-to-face and digital, with a lot more digital than there used to be. But I really don't think we're going to get out of face-to-face entirely. And then it also begs the question of, white collar participation has been remote and increasingly remote for a while, but we all don't have those kind of jobs. And is that fair? I think the other thing we see is, hey, we've got meat packers who are disproportionately being impacted by this disease. And that turns out, this whole critical worker debate, I'm not getting on my high horse about it, I can calm myself down, but, it's very possible to extend the benefits to people who must have some physical proximity because it's more equipment oriented. There's still OT, IT benefits to be made, and distributed capabilities and work scheduling benefits and 3D printing. We're also, I think, in a space where that can be prepared for innovation. And now I think we also have the incentive to do it around quarantining and breaking it up. So I think the trends that we saw in white collar work will now begin to expand into hospitals and mines and factories. And we'll be talking, about OT, IT much more, because if we all need the same machine to manufacture a chip or to sensibly cut up some meat, then there'll be a lot of conversations about how best to use that machine and how many machines and where should they be and are they being utilized. And I think that's the IT, OT next gen of helping these organizations redesign themselves so everybody is safer, everybody's quality of life is improved, and we still as a society keep functioning, because we need digital and we need physical. There's no getting around those two things.
Yeah, completely agreed. Distributed manufacturing starts to come into the conversation. Yeah. You mentioned 3D printing, done some work with that. Bringing manufacturing to, different areas, shorten supply chains. There's a ton of benefits that start to cascade as you open up that conversation.
Yeah.
I think we could have a whole nother podcast episode on that topic.
I'll come back anytime, guys. Great
Sounds
conversation.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, great conversation. Thanks so much, Tim. It was, I learned a lot. So, appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. And I'll say just, it's real easy to look back and claim you knew what was going on. You did everything intentionally. And to your earlier question, Dan, that clearly wasn't the case. We've stumbled. We've done an educated stumble into a great space, and I feel really grateful to be able to bring some of the things I've been doing for more than a few decades to bear on a real societal problem, and helping people who maybe didn't know that they wanted to be digitally driven or data driven, and helping them really get back to work, because I just think it's a great time to be able to do that. So I'm just grateful for that opportunity. Grateful opportunity to talk to you, and grateful opportunity to do the work I'm doing.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. What will be interesting to see is where you and your work, along with the economy, is a year from now. Once we get through this winter season, have another year of digital forward work behind a lot of companies, and I think it's going to be a very different and it progressed economy from where we are right now.
I'm putting it in my calendar, Tom. First week of September, 2021.
All right. That's great. We'll follow up, hopefully before then too. But
great.
That sounds great. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of All Things Data. If you enjoyed this show and want more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and others, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating or a review. Until next time.